All right, everybody, welcome into episode 148 of the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. Yes, we're even that much closer to episode 150, just a couple away. Cannot wait to celebrate 150 episodes here in the middle of July 2024. Man, it seems like just the other day we launched this podcast on January of 2022, and now here we are, just a couple episodes away from episode 150. Man, it's going to be a lot of fun, but let's focus on episode 148 because that's a lot of fun too. My guest on the show today is my friend Andrea Bitner. Now, I'll tell you this about Andrea. She is an educator, she's an author, she's a speaker. She lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and has worked with students in grades K through 12 throughout her 22 years in public education. Her first book, Take Me Home, was published by Austin Macauley in July, of 2021. Take Me Home is the true story of 11 of her former EL students who give a firsthand account of what it's really like to become bilingual in America. Andrea has also been a co-author of a couple other projects, Chip Baker's The Impact of Influence Volume 3 and the amazing Dr. Rick Jetter's 100 No-Nonsense Things All Leaders Should Stop Doing. Andrea teaches ELs every single day and travels the country speaking and teaching educators how to teach and reach our EL students and effectively communicate with EL families. And I will tell you, Andrea is one of those people in the space that I've gotten to know very well, have a good relationship with her. And man, we had so much fun in this conversation, folks. You're not going to want to miss it. You're going to get the whole thing right after. One of the most interesting challenges that I faced as first an assistant principal and then as a principal was working in a culture where our English language learning students weren't always well included in what was happening in our school and in our school community. I remember actually early on that our English language learner students typically would hang in a little group right outside the door of their classroom, and they really didn't venture too far away. We were very intentional, very deliberate with finding ways to get our students included so that they felt like they were truly part of our community. And it made a big difference in the culture of our school. It made a big difference in the results, honestly, in getting those students connected and having them ultimately be successful in our academic program. And I say that to lead in to my guest today on the show, because while we were stumbling around in the dark trying to find a great way to get our ELs included, man, we could have used Andrea Bitner, because man, you talk about somebody who just flat gets it with making those connections with our group of students, our ELs, who typically are marginalized in our schools. And honestly, they just have great things to offer if we're willing to take the time to build a relationship with them. So I'm excited for this conversation today with Andrea. Andrea, welcome into the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do this really quick just to, I guess, set the audience up for this conversation. Give them just a little background, a little bit of something to kind of orient them to your journey, the path that you have followed, and what, I guess, really gets you so fired up about working with our EL students and EL teachers.
Absolutely. So I am an English language learner teacher, author, and speaker based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So if you've ever been to Philadelphia, we welcome you here on the East Coast. I lovingly say we are part of the fastest speaking, most impatient part of the country. And I actually started my EL journey quite some time ago. I've been involved in this field now as an educator for 24 years, and 17 of them have been spent as an EL teacher. But I want to share that I didn't start out that way. Most EL teachers don't. I started out as a high school English teacher, and I quickly learned that I had a group of students who hated school. I was hired bright eyed and bushy tailed over the weekend from Westchester University. And that Tuesday, I was placed in my high school freshman classroom, like I said, with kids that hated school. And I spent a long time that year trying to figure out why. And what I found out within the first few months is that they hated school because they couldn't read. And so I went back to school and I became a Title I reading specialist. And I started to work with middle school students at the Title I reading level, eventually moved to elementary students at the Title I reading level. But it was during that time when I was a Title I reading specialist at the middle school that I started to work with English language learners in my classroom. And they started to be a part of our Title I program and support. And I realized again that I felt unequipped to successfully teach English learners. I had this great grade level partner, Mike Kinko, across the hall, who was the EL teacher in our building at that time. And so I started to pick his brain and I decided that I wanted to go back to school again to become an EL teacher. And so that's when I started to move into the field of English learners, because I met these amazing kids that I wanted to learn how to teach best. And I've been there ever since.
I think that's wonderful. You know, not very many people, and as educators, let's be honest, we are problem solvers, we're givers, we want to make a difference, but not a lot of people would follow the path that you followed. It might be, I know those kids need help, but maybe that's not for me. Tell me a little bit of what it was that really drew you in. I mean, you've talked about, those kids were struggling, those kids didn't like school, but there had to be a little bit more that pulled you in, that made you say, you know what, I really do want to work with this group of students.
Something I think that I was always so impressed with these kids was their amount of grit and resilience that they demonstrated to do well in school. Because I got really curious about where these students were coming from, what their life experiences were, how their families felt about school and what their goals were. And so I had kids from all different walks of life. I had kids that were kids who had crossed the border. I had kids that were adopted. I had exchange students. I had kids that had waited 10 years for a visa and came after their parents. I had kids that had waited 10 years for a visa and were here before their parents. And I had students that were born here. And what we know now in the trend with English learners across the country is that 1 in 4 mostly are. 1 in 4 are going to be born here in the US. And I think what I really started to admire about them most was this gift that their parents had given them without them even realizing it. I had a student in second grade one day, and she spoke Khmer, which is part of the Cambodian language, with mom, and she would speak English at school. And one day I looked at her and I said, Sophie, I said, do you realize how amazing you are? And I said, you are bilingual. Do you know what that means? And she looked at me and she said, Miss B, I just talked to you in one language and I talked to mommy in another. That's all. It was really that simple to her.
Yeah.
And they don't have that awareness that they're bilingual until later in life. Usually around third grade is when I noticed that social awareness sets in. But what I started to feel was just such a tremendous appreciation and admiration for all of not only the struggles that they were going through, but in the gift that they were gaining by allowing their parents to teach them their first language and learning English at school.
So you mentioned a really interesting statistic there that now 1 in 4 of our EL students are born in the United States. I think if you asked most teachers, I mean, if you played like two truths and a lie and you had that in there, they would say that that one's the lie. And so where I want to go with that is this. I think there are a lot of bits of misinformation or misunderstandings or untruths or what have you. Let's do a little bit of dispelling some of the myths about our EL students. And I don't have any like ready to roll off my tongue, so I'm gonna lean on you. Let's just take a few of them and let's tear them apart for the myth that they truly are.
Yes, I've experienced a lot of those myths as an educational person, as an EL teacher, as a school leader, as a coach who works with gen ed teachers across the country. And one of the first ones I think that is important to dispel is that lack of language never equals lack of intelligence. And I have had teachers who I adore who get very trepidatious and hesitation when a newcomer, a student who is what we would call level one, an entering student, there's different terminology around the country, but a newcomer, a student who is just learning the language for the first time into their classroom. And the assumption is that they don't know anything. How am I going to teach them? And what is the most important factor that I think is important for people to connect to that is that, yes, lack of language never equals lack of intelligence. It's just that they don't know the word for it or the concept of it. And to connect with that, it's also important to say that their strength in their literacy, in their first language, in their reading, writing, listening, and speaking is what's going to influence or impact their acquisition of language in the L2, in the English. Because if they have a root to grab onto, they already know how to read and write in their first language. They just have to transfer their skills to learn the differences to read and write and listen and speak in a second, if that makes sense. So I think
Yeah,
that's
it
one of
does.
the first ones to dispel. Another one that was important to dispel was that all parents prefer their first language in language communication, which is very much not true. Some of our parents prefer English. And so it's really important to have that communication with your parents about what language would you prefer your school communication to come home in. And I think that the assumption is that all parents don't prefer English or all parents don't know English, and that's not true. Um,
The communication piece with parents, not necessarily being preferred in their native language, is something that's very interesting. I think, especially, the bulk of this audience are school and district level leaders. And I think we probably have pushed, I know I'm guilty of this, that, we need to make sure that we are communicating in Spanish, we are communicating in whatever the language might be, right? But what you're saying is, if I'm understanding correctly, that we need to be communicating with the parents, asking what they prefer in terms of which language they want to communicate. Why would they not? Give me a reason, because I think there's probably some listeners who are like, wait a minute now, Andrea, I don't know if I'm going to buy this one here. You're going to have to sell a little bit harder for me. Why might a family want communication in English if, let's say, French is their language that they speak at home?
well, I think you have to be careful about that because you're assuming then that they're literate in French. So, not all parents were, some of those parents were also educated here, but they can listen to French and they can speak French because of their life experiences. And so it's an important factor to say to mom and dad, hey, what language do you prefer school communication to come home in? Because they may or may not be literate in French. And so when I send that communication home to parents, it's in an email and it goes something like this. Hey, I am the English language learner teacher for your building, or hey, I'm the school leader or school administrator of this building. I noticed in our school system that your student is in our English language or English language learner or bilingual education program. I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for giving them that gift. I would love to know what language would you prefer school communication to come home in? Please complete this Google form to let us know. That's it. And what's nice about the Google form is that it's translatable. So if they do want to use it because they're literate in their first language, they can. And if they don't, they don't. Some of their parents will say to me, they prefer both languages. They want it to come home in English and French. And we do that as well because they are, making that preference. Some parents will say, no, I only need it to come home in English. And some parents will say, well, I don't understand French. My student will help me with the English, or I have a family member who will help me with the English, send it home that way. But no matter, how you want to slice it, the important piece is that you're asking what the preference could be.
I love that so much. Again, folks, we can't make those assumptions. I think that's really, really a powerful statement. Let's do a couple more. There've got to be a couple more myths that we can bust a little bit here on the show.
I think that some of the other myths that people have really kind of attached themselves to is that learning English is easy. And it's not. Learning English is one of the most unpredictable languages in the world. And it's because we borrowed our language from so many other places. And we break our own rules all the time. And when kids come into school and, let's say go into pre-K for the first time, I want people to be aware that that's the first time if they've never gone to preschool or if they've never watched much TV in English, that's the first time their language doesn't work for them because they've been home with mommy or, family for the first 5 years of their life speaking, let's say, Arabic. And then they come to school and they're dropped off on that kindergarten day and they're not aware that they're bilingual. They're not aware, that there are other people that speak different languages. So our students in pre-K and K will just speak to us in their first language, completely expecting you to understand and respond to what their needs are. And they get really scared, as they should, when it doesn't work. And so just letting people know that it's really important to be aware of that, and it's the same idea for newcomers when they come to school. They have that trepidation of being in that school community. I think one of the assumptions and where I'm kind of going with this, in addition to what I said before, was that the responsibility of an English learner is solely the responsibility of the EL teacher. And that is just not the case, because 80% of the time, our English learners aren't with their EL teacher. Our English learners are in the school environment outside of that classroom with everybody else. And so it's really important that everybody in the building knows who your English language learners are. And I mean from the transportation team to the maintenance team to the cafeteria team to your office school team, because all of their interactions, you want them to be as successful as possible. And so everybody needs to be aware of where that student's proficiency level might be.
I think that's fantastic, and that I want to take that and move in slightly a little bit different direction. We could probably just play MythBusters for a while here, but what you're talking about there, I think, is a perfect segue into the work that you now do. I mean, obviously, you continue to support students in your school and in your community, but over the last couple of years, you have really been stepping out and providing support for other schools and other districts who have similar challenges or their own unique challenges with English language learners. So let's just make believe a little bit here. I'm a seated superintendent, and I certainly have a challenge in my district with English language learner students, with their performance, with how our teachers are engaging with them. I know that I need some support. So I bring Andrea Bitner to my school district. What type of work, what type of support are you going to be providing, whether that's the teachers, the bus drivers, the cafeteria workers, the front office personnel? Let's talk about that. How do we get better in education supporting our EL students?
Yes, and I think it's a great question that you asked, and it's so important the way that you said it. I want to kind of piggyback on that by saying it's not that people don't want to do better, they're just not sure how. And when I come to the table, the first thing that I work with districts on is there are two lenses that need to be in place in order for our ELs to be successful. And those lenses come not only from your EL teachers, but from your general education teachers and school community as well. And it's only with both lenses at that table that you're going to have a clear vision for where you want your students to go. And so when I come into districts, the first thing I say is, let's do a informal assessment of your content, your communication, your confidence, your collaboration, your accommodations that are in place for your students. So we have this assessment we do together to kind of check out where are our strengths and where do we need to grow. And a lot of times they're very similar across the country. It's our teachers aren't confident in working with our English language learners. They're unsure how to accommodate instruction and assessments. Or our students themselves, our English language learners, are truant, or they're not engaging in their instruction, or we only have one EL teacher for 11 buildings and we're not sure how to schedule for them. Or some things are like, we don't know how to confidently communicate with our EL families because we use our children as interpreters. And I'll look and I'll say, well, we can get better at all of those things. And so what I do is go back to the schools and I spend time with them, and whether it's in a single session or a half a day or a few days or a long-term contract, and I can teach you how to better reach, teach, and connect with your English language learners and families with confidence. And I think that's the piece that a lot of schools are missing, and it's just because they've never been trained. They've never been trained. And as the EL population continues to grow across the country, teachers that have never had English language learners are starting to have more in their classrooms. Or schools that maybe had 2 or 3 a year are now having 15 to 20 and growing. So even that small little jump for a smaller school is a big deal because they are seeing that population growth. And so that's what I get to do. I get to still work with the English language learners daily as I'm still teaching, and I get to travel the country helping to inspire, inform, and support teachers and schools and leaders.
I think one of the biggest pieces that I took away from there, there's so much good stuff in there, but one of the biggest pieces that I took away there was you referred to a vision your for your English language population. So oftentimes we'll do strategic planning, for example, for a district, and we'll talk about that mission and that vision. I push leaders all the time. What is your compelling vision for your school? Let's bring that down now to that vision as you described it for your L population. Talk me through that conversation. What might that look like? And maybe where are some areas that school leaders and maybe district leaders miss the mark when going for that particular piece?
When you think about the vision for your English language learners, the first thing I ask people to consider is flipping the script. Instead of looking at your English language learners and saying, I want English right now, because that's what they experience a lot of, or they've seen their parents or family members experience a lot of. Flip the script to look at that family and say, you're learning English? Wow. And when you start to have an appreciation rather than a depreciation of the skills that they're bringing to the table, now you can start to design for them. And one of the presentations I do is called What Should You Ask When an ML Joins Your Class, or an ML is multilingual learner, or EL joins your class, English language learner. And it goes through these 10 essential questions of, how are you going to have a successful vision for these students? Well, it starts with all of the people who are going to interact with them throughout the day. It starts with having an understanding of the diversity that ELs bring to the table. Like I mentioned before, they come from all walks of life with all levels of education, and no EL story is the same. But who you do have sitting in front of you is a young person with a gift. And you can across the country label it however you would like, but they are not an intervention. They are not a transition. What they are is an expansion. They're getting ready to be in your classroom to expand the skills they have. So the first vision that you would have is find out about who your EL students are. Take the movie and not the snapshot of their prior experience. Talk to their parents to find out what language looks like in their home. And once we have those pieces in place, in addition to gathering information from their prior school, whether that be down the street, the next state over, or in a different country, when you can put all that together, now you're ready to start to design instruction. So the first piece is finding all of that out. The second piece is instruction, getting your team of teachers together. I always say to schools, it's a we before me. No EL student is going to be successful alone. No EL teacher is going to be successful alone. And many of them are used to island living, where they're hopping from school to school, space to space, building to building, conference room to conference room. But when those teachers can connect and being intentional about giving your EL teachers time to connect with your gen ed teachers to design that plan for that student, when everybody's on board is when you will be able to reach success. From there, we would move into the assessment piece. What district assessments do you have in place to assess these students during the year? Do you have an EL committed, instructional plan with a curriculum? Or is your EL teacher kind of flying by blindly, trying to figure out what, the skills are for the students and what she can use or he can use to teach it? So committing to a curriculum for those students. And then finally, accessing and contacting their parents and talking to the kids about what they want to do next. One of the other pieces that I work with schools is not only students, but with the kids themselves. And I actually have done presentations called Being Bilingual is a Gift, where I go out to the schools in the middle and high school level and talk to those kids about what an asset they have. Because unfortunately, they haven't had a lot of experiences in life where people have treated it that way.
Man,
So that
that's
was a
just so
lot.
good.
I can
Yeah,
start talking
no,
all
no,
day
what?
about it, but
I'm sure you
but
can, and
that's
that's
where you
good though,
start.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, again, I know so many school leaders right now. Man, if you were listening in the car, I hope you hit the pause button, or pulled over before you tried to like jot down notes and all of that kind of stuff. Just so much good stuff there because, and this isn't just true with our EL students, but for the sake of our conversation, we'll stay on that. So often we focus only on the macro and we don't allow ourselves to go to the micro and think about how do we build a vision for this group of students, for this group of staff, for this particular portion of our community. And when we think at the micro level while still obviously keeping the macro view, man, that's really when the great leadership starts to kick in. So, man, that was just such good stuff, folks. Whew, man, I love it. I love it. So let's transition just a little bit, right? Because if I don't talk about this amazing little book, I'm going to really regret it, folks. Andrea's book, "Take Me Home," is, oh my gosh, it's one of those that, whew, it will hit you hard, but it will also really make you think, and it will really make you do something differently as a human being. So without telling the whole story, because I want everybody to go buy the book, and we will link that, folks, in the show notes for you. Just tell us a little bit behind the the purpose, the core, and kind of the, I don't know, what drove you to write this book.
So Take Me Home is a true story of 11 of my former students who are now alumni in their late 20s, early 30s, who tell what it was like to really become bilingual in America. And we hit almost every continent, and tried to hit almost every experience that we could think of. And it's written in English and it repeats in Spanish. And it's been read around the world now. I've been told it's being sold in London, which is pretty cool, as a book that helps people connect, reflect, have great conversation, and ask good questions about the diversity that truly lies behind our English language learners. In addition to educators reading it, it's also been read by middle and high school students. And I have been really honored to be a part of some great Zooms this spring from students across the country who wanted to talk to us after they read it. And so we got to hop in, and I would bring some of the young people from Take Me Home with me. I'm getting older in my career because I'm now teaching their children, which is awesome. But it's been really inspiring and really telling to have these young adults telling us, I'm so glad that I read this because I thought it was only me. Or I'm so glad that I read this because now if I can see it, I can be it. I can see other kids that were just like me that are so successful. And I know that they are there and they are traveling through the hardships and struggles, but they came out on the other side with success. And so our hope in writing that book was because of my school experience. I'm the teacher in that book. And because of seeing all the assumptions that were constantly being made about our kids and wanting to honor all of their experiences while opening people's eyes to the gift that they truly have. And so, without giving away too much of the true story that lies behind it, um, people have laughed, people have cried, people have connected. It is changing, I would say, shifting the view in a positive way for our English learners across the country. And we're really proud of it.
Yeah, and as you should be. It is a truly wonderful book. Folks, I highly recommend you grab a copy. Again, I'll put that link down in the show notes so you can go and grab that. We'll also have links in the show notes so you can get connected with Andrea, so you can bring her to your school, bring her to your district, bring her to your community, so that you can start to work on really getting that vision in place. So, Andrea, we've reached that point in this show. Man, I'd love to just keep this conversation going and going and going. And I guess maybe some full disclosure for everybody. I've known Andrea for quite some time. We've actually got a really good friendship, have been fortunate enough to be at several conferences together at the same time. And I've loved this conversation. I'd love to keep it going. But we are at that point where I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the show. This is the Leaning into Leadership podcast. So, Andrea, what are you doing right now to lean into leadership?
You know, what I think I'm doing the most to lean into leadership is I'm bursting my own bubble. And what I mean by that is our leaders do not, along with our educators, have opportunities to look outside of our own districts, of our own counties, heck, of our own states many times and connect with other educators who may have similar challenges or ideas for solutions. And so I've been really intentional about joining professional social media groups and looking at solutions and ideas and challenges that people are having and offering my expertise when I can and soaking in theirs. Or just hopping on a Zoom with an EL teacher in Kansas last week who wanted to share ideas about family engagement, or just looking within my own district in districts next door. Hey, could we do a fall conference together at our local intermediate unit and connect our teachers so that they could learn more of what's happening right down the street? And so I think, for me, leaning into leadership right now means continuing to develop myself professionally and, like I lovingly say, never being the smartest person in the room, surrounding myself with people that have ideas that would be helpful to what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah, it's just outstanding stuff. I really appreciate that so much. So, Andrea, everybody's going to want to get in touch with you. I'll put it all in the show notes, but just really quick, what's one or two quick ways they can get in touch with you?
There's two easy ways to get in touch with me. The first is our website, which is andreabitnerbooks.com. There is a space there for you to directly connect with me, which many people have. You can also find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter at Bitner Andrea, and I would be happy to hear more about your amazing kids and teachers and help out anytime.
Excellent. Excellent. Oh man, this was so much fun. Andrea, I'm glad we finally got to make this happen. We've talked about it for quite a while, and now finally, we've got this thing recorded and got to hang out together on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Man, I hope you enjoyed your time listening to Andrea Bitner as much as I enjoyed the time spending with her for episode 148. There's just so many great things in there, so many great resources, so many great opportunities to learn from one of the truly great educators out there. So make sure you hit the show notes links and get connected with Andrea if you are not already. And now it's time for a pep talk. So what I'm thinking about this week and what I'd like to challenge you with this time of year, educators, we're typically not in our buildings, or maybe we're just getting ready to go back to our buildings and we're trying to just enjoy our life. We're trying to just be a human being. We're not the teacher, the principal, the superintendent, the whatever else our title might be. But this is a time when really leaning into those relationships is important. This is when you have new people moving into your community, new people starting to show up at different events, and you have the opportunity to be the face of your school. And I know that could be exhausting. I get it. But if you're not telling a positive story of your school, what maybe is somebody else hearing about your school from somebody who maybe doesn't want to tell that positive story? You are an ambassador all the time for your school. So make sure you lean into that role. Take the opportunity to build some relationships with those new people who've come into your community, who new to your school, and make sure that they feel like they're seen and heard and valued and trusted in your community, and that their kids are going to be really enjoying themselves at your school. So there you go, folks. That's what I have for you. Lean into those relationships. Make the new people in your community feel welcome, because this is the time of year when they're all starting to get moved in. They're all starting to get settled, and they're starting to wonder, what's it going to be like for my kid at their school this year? And you've got the opportunity to make it happen in a positive way. And get out there. Have a road to awesome week.